One of the most evolved ideas or concepts between World Wars I and II was that of espionage. In a mere period of 20 years, what used to be considered an unnecessary act now became a factor that led the Allies to victory. World leaders during the time period of the Second World War recognized the numerous advantages of knowing the enemy's movements and plans, much more than the idea of upholding honor, like in the First World War. Therefore, in a time of ongoing world evolution and social change, during a war of opposing beliefs, the stage was set for one of the most influential, if not the most influential spies of all time to begin his legacy. This is the story of Juan Pujol Garcia. Born to a liberal family on February 14, 1912, Pujol was a dreamer ever since he was a child. He did not focus much on work, but instead was living in his fantasy world, which his parents could not understand. During the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, Pujol fought on both sides of the conflict, priding himself by not firing a single shot for either. When the war was over, however, he emerged with a hatred of fascism and communism. When the Second World War began, he was ready to do whatever it takes to fight against the Nazis, saying he wanted to make a contribution to the good of humanity. Multiple times he requested the British allow him to become a spy, but for security reasons, as well as the fact that he was not trained, he was denied each time. Pujol now decided he had to become a German spy and send misinformation reports himself. He asked the Abwehr, which is the German intelligence agency, if he could become an agent, so they accepted and gave him money to travel and live in Britain. Pujol had his own plans, however. He settled in Spain and began to use any and all public documents he could find to write misinformation reports to send back to Germany. Pujol filled his reports with lots of useless information in order to slow down the German decoding systems. Over the next 2 years that he did this, he gained the trust of the Abwehr. Near the end of 1942, Pujol got into contact with MI5 and was taken in as a double-cross agent under the codename Garbo. He was partnered with Tommy Harris, a Spanish-speaking MI5 officer. Pujol and Harris became very close working together. In his autobiography, he wrote, "We soon began to confide in each other, and I always trusted him completely." Together, Pujol and Tommy created the Garbo network, which consisted of 27 fake spies from different backgrounds, all working to send misinformation reports back to Germany. Pujol also cooperated with the British government and media, working together to make Garbo more trustworthy by feeding bits of true information with loads of false or useless information. He employed an array of tactics to ensure the Germans trusted him. The stories of his sub-agents became like a novel, and he was the writer. He would kill off or displace these spies when needed, to ensure the plot was perfect. During the Operation Torch landings in North Africa, Pujol sent documents containing every tactic and movement from the Allies, with their permission of course, to the Germans, just slightly too late to be useful. This was to increase his credibility, and it was very effective. He also told the Germans where to shoot their artillery, averting it from Allied forces and saving many lives. By 1944, the Allies were planning Operation Overlord, an attempt to invade mainland Europe. For this operation, Pujol was chosen to lead the deception effort. Operation Overlord was split into two sectors: Fortitude South, which was an attempt to convince the Germans that the Allies were attacking from Britain into Calais, where Hitler already thought an invasion was preparing, and Fortitude North, which was an attempt to convince the Germans that the Allies were going to attack in Norway and Denmark. By using misinformation reports, a balloon and cardboard army to fool surveillance planes, and the fact that Hitler already trusted Pujol more than any of his other spies, the Normandy invasion, which occurred on June 6, 1944, caught the Germans by surprise. Hitler remained convinced, however, that the real attack would come from Calais, like Pujol told him in the most important letter of his career, which was sent on June 8, 2 days after the initial attack. Because of this, Hitler personally ordered the German reinforcements to turn back. This is why even months after the initial Normandy invasion, the Fuhrer was still holding back some of his best panzer divisions, still believing that Garbo's million-man army would appear at Calais. Thanks to Pujol and his sub-agents, as well as those who helped him along the way, Operation Fortitude South and Operation Overlord were a great success and signaled the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. Pujol had such a high reputation amongst the Germans, however, so they still believed he was correct with his information, but their presence in Calais had scared off the Allies. Yes, he was that good. Operation Overlord was not successful. Many historians believe the war would have lasted longer, leading to the death of more Allied troops and Jewish people in work camps. It is also a possibility that the war would have only ended with an atomic bomb being dropped on Berlin, thus killing or injuring at least tens of thousands more innocent civilians. By decreasing the number of enemy troops defending in Normandy, Juan Pujol vastly reduced Allied casualties, including those of the 21,400 Canadian men proudly fighting on Juno Beach. His misinformation letters to the Germans throughout the war also saved many lives from the 1.1 million Canadians that had fought throughout the war. After fighting past the Normandy landing zone, the Allied forces swept through Europe relatively easily because of the lack of defending Germans, thanks in big part to the Deception Campaign. Winston Churchill later said that Pujol's work in the Deception Campaign was the crowning achievement of the long and glorious history of the British Secret Service. By the end of the Second World War, Pujol had become a hero to those at war, those at home, and those in concentration camps. He was not Canadian and did not directly work with the Canadian Intelligence Agency either, yet he had still managed to save the lives of thousands of Canadians, as well as ending the war quickly so families could finally be reunited. Not only had he helped prevent the loss of thousands of lives throughout his career, but he had also ensured the Germans were well misinformed throughout the entire war, and had also taken $4 million from the Germans for what they thought was incredible work. Pujol also received a high honor from both the Germans and British for his contributions to the war effort. Eisenhower later told him and Tommy that their work was worth the equivalent of a whole army division. Just 2 men helped shape the world today with equality, democracy, and liberty. Lest we forget, the saviors of D-Day.